I guess people assume sometimes it just made sense immediately to me, and it didn't necessarily.
Welcome to the LabVIEW Experiment. I am your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. In my 15 years of working with and training developers, I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of experiments. Over here, we believe in embracing failure as the essential learning experience that it is. And what better way to learn than from other people's mistakes? In this podcast, I talk to industry experts, colleagues, and friends about their failures and how they have turned them into future successes. So I'm here today with Casey May of Zyah Solutions. Casey just recently became a LabVIEW Champion. So congratulations, Casey.
Thanks. Yeah, it's you had a lot to do with it, I think.
Yeah. Welcome to the club. It's one of those things I feel like, and I went through this, people don't know. So for anybody who's listening, if you want to be a LabVIEW Champion, don't sit around and wait for NI to ask you, because that will not happen. That is not the way it works. So you have to go apply, and I think a lot of people don't know that. And I mean, there's some people in the Champions community who like keeping it this like small elite group. I'm kind of like a Big Tent person. Like if people really want to put the effort into evangelizing LabVIEW, I would say let them in.
Yeah, we don't need fewer people evangelizing LabVIEW at this point, right?
Yeah. But it's weird. Like I applied for the Champions program because I was sitting in an active framework class with Nancy, and she was sitting next to me. She's like, "So, do you fill out your Champions application?" And I'm like, "No." Like I hadn't even really given it any thought. And so then I went and applied, and then I didn't get in, which was really odd because I was like, I thought for sure, like if the person who ran the program told me I should apply, that was like a sure sign that I'd get in, and then I didn't. So and then I had to apply again. Uh, So yeah, my advice to people when they ask me, should I apply because champion, like anybody who asks, generally, if I know them at all and like they're like at all qualified, I'm like, go put your name in the hat. Like, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had kind of imposter syndrome for a while, I think, too, and also just to try to be more involved in the community in the past few years, at least.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I definitely had imposter syndrome because when I filled out the app the first time, I was like, I don't really know that I belong here. I was like, but Nancy told me I should apply, so here's my application. I didn't even really like try to sell myself, which probably was not the way to get in. And then Nancy's like, "Oh, you got to go get better well known," because in some ways, like the open secret is it's kind of like this popularity contest to get in there in a way, in the sense that like if the champions get to vote, if nobody knows who you are, then like it's hard to get in if people don't actually know you. So
I mean, part of the application is that you have to have a sponsor or sponsors, right? So people that you can point to and say, like, yeah, they know me. They
uh,
kind of know what I've done and can vouch for me.
they may have
Yeah.
added that since I applied. I don't remember. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, I mean the biggest benefit I think is the uh, the forum, the Champions forum. There's a lot of good questions that get asked on it. Actually, we should probably do a better job of posting more of those things outside of the LabVIEW Champions forums, because there's some really interesting discussions on there that don't need to be behind that wall.
That's by far the most active forum that I subscribe to updates
Yeah,
from.
well, champions have a lot of opinions on things too, so there is that. So
Yeah.
cool. So yeah, I mentioned you're from Zyah, so you used to have your own consulting company, right? Left Door Solutions. Was that just you?
Yeah, that was just me. And it's
Okay.
still active, but I'm actually in the process of kind of shutting that down just because I'm trying to do all the business through Zyah Solutions now. But yeah, I had been a consultant just on my own since 2000, late 2011, as a part of Left Door Solutions, and then in the past, I want to say it's 2021. I guess we started Zyah Solutions in earnest. Me and a few other CLAs. We've been going strong since then.
Cool. Yeah, we'll come back around to Zyah. But so what did you do before you did Left Door Solutions? Did you just start out as a consultant, or did you like get some experience first?
Now, so I was I got out of grad school in 2004 back then with a mechanical engineering degree. So it wasn't in software engineering or anything like that. And I spent some time kind of bumming around actually played poker for a while to make a living for a little bit during the online boom. But eventually, being a college graduate, fresh out of grad school, it's not like I had a big bankroll. So there were a couple months that were rather tough. And so I'm like, okay, I guess it's time to go get a real job. And at the time, Dan Hooks, who you know, is also a part of Zyah Solutions right now. I had gone to grad school with him, but he was working at CLA Systems, which used to be a rather large system integrator for NI. And he was working there. They had an opening. He encouraged me to apply for that. I did. And even though computer programming and software engineering wasn't something that I had majored in or anything, it was always something that I had kind of a side interest in. And so fortunately, they were open to that. And so I worked at Cal Bay for 6 years, I want to say, before I struck out on my own.
So when you say you had a side interest in programming, that were you programming in LabVIEW on the side or something else?
No, I mean it was just tinkering and stuff that I had taken some classes in undergrad, but not enough to get a minor or anything like that. So at the time, I think it was mostly Java that I was learning about. But I mean, it's just the concepts in general. And when I was a little kid, there were some library books, like older stuff, but I did stuff on my dad's Atari and like programming basic. It was simple games and stuff back then. Not anything with graphics. But.
Yeah, the Java thing kind of makes sense because I know you're really into object-oriented programming, and like that Java is definitely all objects, right? Isn't that?
Yeah, although I mean, I don't think I got to the level where that was really the focus of the class.
Ah,
It was more kind of but yes, I am into object-oriented programming at
well,
this stage.
yeah, I've been learning Python, and in Python, everything's an object, but it's not like you can write code like outside of object. Like you can do procedural code, you can do functional code. You don't have to use objects when you're using Python. I mean, you're using them, but you don't necessarily even know it, kind of thing.
Yeah,
It's a little bit more. I mean, it depends, right? If you're doing simple object-oriented stuff, you can treat it basically as a cluster, and that's fine. But then once you get into inheritance and all that craziness, then things get complicated rather quickly, or can. Then you
yeah.
get actor framework, and then it's a whole other ballgame. I'm sure we'll get to actor framework at some point in this discussion.
Mhm.
So you did some consulting. You went out on your own, and now you are with Zyah. So you guys have several people there, right? Like a collection of LabVIEW architects. Is that it?
Yeah, there's four of us at the moment, and we also have like a pool of subcontractors that we can sometimes pull from if the need arises. But there are four partners. Yeah, we're all CLAs, and we all, not that we don't use other frameworks, but we all have a tendency to go towards active framework as our primary option.
Yeah.
And so we kind of align on a lot of things that way. So it sort of made sense.
So, question: why actor framework? Like, what's the driving decision behind that? Is it just like that just makes the most sense to you guys, or is there a specific reason that you picked that?
Um, I don't know that I know the answer for the other guys, but at least I can say for me, um, I guess people assume sometimes it just made sense immediately to me, and it didn't necessarily. I think Norm said in one of the presentations at the first GDevCon NA, like, you probably just, Casey and other people just, it immediately made sense. And that was not the case. I was sort of frustrated with it. But what won me over was just its use of the command pattern, really. And then
Yeah.
from there, I've seen the benefits in other ways. But when I started using LabVIEW, I was lucky that there were a lot of LabVIEW developers on the team where I started at Calbase Systems, because they were, like I said, a rather large system integrator. And we had a template or like a framework that we used there that was very similar to things like DQMH, stuff like that. So it had your like standard queued message handler with producer consumer type things. And I was always frustrated with that, or I soon became frustrated with the limitations in that of like code reuse, because being a system integrator with different clients, we would do something for one client, there'd be another project for someone else, and there would be a lot of overlap a lot of times, like with a logger, say. But
Mhm.
they didn't want things to happen exactly the same way, right? So now, looking back in retrospect, like classes is how I would solve that now. It wasn't really an option when I started using LabVIEW. There wasn't object-oriented stuff wasn't really developed too much. But then, yeah, when Actor Framework came along, I started using that, the way to reuse a lot of the same stuff between and tweak stuff that's different between similar but not exactly the same modules or actors was the thing that really appealed to me.
Yeah, I think that definitely is one of the selling points of Actor Framework.
You know,
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, yeah, Actor Framework was a challenge to learn. I feel like when you're learning, so you said you started out with Java before, but I started out like I learned like Pascal and C in school or something. Um, and so learning object-oriented programming was this like mental leap. I think it's like a switch goes off in your brain, right? Like you don't understand, and then all of a sudden, like one day, you just suddenly get it, and you're like, oh yeah, this makes sense now. And Actor Framework was kind of the same way. It was like, okay, yeah, I kind of like I understand how it's working, but I don't understand why, and I don't understand like the decisions. And then all of a sudden, like one day, you're like, oh, okay, now I see the advantages of it. Um, yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah, now I feel like I gravitate more towards DQMH mostly because I'm doing a lot of stuff where I'm turning it over to other people, and there's not a lot. I don't know. Maybe it's growing, but like it was my experience that there's not a lot of consultants out there or even LabVIEW programmers out there who are using Actor Framework regularly who are really good with it. There are definitely some people who dabble in it, but if you gave them a big complex Actor Framework project and asked them to maintain it, I don't think they would have a lot of luck. And also,
yeah.
I feel like Actor Framework, the discoverability, like if you document the project well, handing it off to somebody else is fine. But like I've always found like the stuff that I wrote in Actor Framework, I understood because I understood the whole system. But every time I inherited one, I didn't really. Although, as Christian pointed out, if it was a really good, well-written project and everybody was happy with it, I probably wouldn't have never inherited it. So there's probably some bias there.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the parts that I was frustrated with early on when I was learning to use Actor Framework is that, as many people pointed out before, a lot of the structure and complexity that's you can see pretty easily on the block diagram in other frameworks gets moved kind of on disk, right, and into the project. And I think that's probably why there was a. We can talk more about this later, but like things like Bowser the browser we
Mm-hmm.
developed to kind of help with that. But yeah, to your other point that yeah, if you're handing it off to someone else, maybe Actor Framework isn't the best choice. Um, but a lot of the stuff that we do, we're working on as a team at Zion, and like I said, everyone is pretty familiar with it. So then we can kind of leverage its strengths a lot within our team,
Yeah.
and we can get stuff done. I feel like uh, pretty quickly, building on stuff that we do have and extending it, and all the other benefits that come with some of those object-oriented strengths.
Yeah, Stephen Loftus Mercer's always put out there that like, oh yeah, you can take a beginner and you can write an actor framework thing and hand them the actor and tell them what to do and they can go do it. And I have not found that to be true. I don't know. Maybe other people have had luck with that, but every time I've tried that, I've gotten the deer in the headlights look.
We've done that to some degree in different things, and I'd say we've had mixed success. Like sometimes it works well, and actually I think it works. It's easier to train somebody who already has some sort of formal or other experience with programming. They're kind of used to kind of these concepts or object-oriented things, and then it clicks a lot faster. But if you're taking someone who's not used to those concepts, it can be difficult
Yeah.
at
Yeah,
times.
well, yeah. Part of the problem with the actor framework is you have to understand object-oriented programming, and then you have to understand actor framework.
Yeah, there's a prerequisite there, right? So it's not just core
Yeah,
one, core two, core three, and then you can use active framework. You need to understand some other ideas.
yeah. Well, it heavily utilizes object-oriented programming, and not does it just utilize it, but you actually have to, like when you're creating classes and stuff, you have to think about how things inherit and all that. Whereas like DQMH, the queue is a class and you use it and you don't have to think about it. You just treat it like a cluster, like a regular queue, and it's fine, and nobody cares. But yeah, actor framework, if you don't understand those inheritance relationships and composition and things like that, you're going to be in a world of hurt.
Yeah, it can come back and bite you. And I mean, definitely kind of in my earlier earlier developmental days with it, it bit me a couple times,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Well, you also kind of have multiple hierarchies you're managing too, because you're managing the actor hierarchy like on disk as far as what actors inherit from what, and you're managing the inheritance of the messages and abstract base messages if you're still doing that, or the interfaces or whatever. But you're also managing the actor tree, which is
yeah.
actually
And
one
that
thing that I kind of like about actor framework over DQMH is that structure of the tree. DQMH kind of like lends itself to creating really crazy, messy topologies.
yeah, there's sort of guardrails, right? In Nectar framework, you have access to your own enqueuer, your callers enqueuer, and any nested actors that you launch. But unless you do stuff to work around that, that's all you get, right? So
Yeah,
it kind of pushes you in that direction. Whereas other things just share the queue with whoever you want, and so
yeah, yeah.
and the good and bad
DQMH.
that comes with that.
Yeah, definitely. Like I remember going on the forums and seeing somebody with a giant DQMH project complaining about problems, and like I took one look at his diagram, and it was like big, huge circular dependencies of messages, and I was like, yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
that's gonna cause problems. And active framework, you can get into that, but you have to try to get into that. By default, you're not gonna get into that. DQMH, it's just like super easy to get into that. And I feel like too, that's the other problem. Like DQMH lowers the barrier for entry into designing larger systems, but it doesn't lower the barrier of knowledge to get into designing larger systems, right? It helps you build them, it doesn't help you design them better in the sense of like thinking about the topologies and the dependencies and interactions and all the problems you can run into. And
Well, you have several blog posts that kind of go into that, talk about recommendations, and your messaging hierarchy or routing ends up looking a lot like the tree
yeah,
thing that you're talking about.
yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, I inherited an active framework, or sorry, a DQMH project, and I was. This was when I was younger, more of a hothead. I got very pissed about this project, and I was like, I'm going to write a blog post about don't do all the stuff like this guy did. And yeah, um, yeah, that probably wasn't. Yeah, that wasn't a great thing to do, but it did turn out to be one of my more popular blog posts. And most of the advice is still good. I stand by most of it. There's a few things I've kind of tweaked over the years, but it's actually good that it's been tweaked because that means I actually learned something since then. So
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, it's always good if I forget who I was talking to in our virtual coffee. I was talking to Putnam and Steve or something, and talking about how like over time your development practices should change, right? If you're still writing code
Hmm.
exactly like you wrote it 20 years ago, I mean, maybe you're the one person who figured it out 20 years ago and you got it right, and like nothing had to change. But I kind of doubt that. So
Yeah, my development practices have definitely changed over that period of time. And also just with the introduction of so many more and better tools, not just with the code itself, right? Like just better source code control, Git versus SVN or something like that, and
mhm.
then CI/CD and all those different tools.
Yeah. So yeah, are you guys doing a lot of CI/CD stuff at Zyah?
We're the stuff that we're doing is still a lot of it is pretty manual, if I'm being honest, and part of it is just there's I feel like in the LabVIEW world, at least, there's still a lot of figuring out what works best and how to do those sort of things. And in that area, I don't think I'm an early adopter. I kind of want to see what other people have done and learn from them rather than trying to figure it all out on my own. So like people like you, the stuff that you were putting out and some of the tools there is very helpful. So we're getting there, but that's one area where it's not as automated as maybe it could be.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm very much trying to lower the barrier of entry to. So I've put together some of the, what is it, like SAS, GCLI tools or something, and it's got a bunch of stuff for doing things from the command line, and then it's got some templates for GitLab. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like very integral to what I do because I just like the idea of being able to get really, really quick feedback. And so
Yeah.
you know Lavinia, and I was working on her project, and like I'd push something and there'd be a bug because there's always bugs. I mean, I should probably do a better job of testing than I do, but I do a pretty good job. I catch a lot of them, but not all of them. And so bug would slip through, and she'd send me an email and say, "Hey, this broke," and in half an hour I can have her build.
Yeah.
It's a complete game changer in my mind. So
Yeah. Yeah. Talking about fast feedback and kind of an agile approach and that sort of thing too. There was a project that we had worked on last year. It was a decent sized thing, but we were able to kind of set it up so that we did 2 week sprints, and we'd actually deliver a product at the end of each of them. We'd incorporate more features each time.
yeah.
And so the client was very much in the loop and like a part of giving us feedback early and often. And it was
Mhm.
great, but it was a little bit confusing because when final delivery came, we went on site, delivered it, and they're like, okay, it looks good. And then we went away and we didn't hear anything from them for what, half a year, months. And we were thinking, that's weird. That almost never happens, right? Normally people come back and they're like, hey, could you tweak this and do that sort of thing? So we figured, I don't know, maybe this was an R&D kind of area. So we figured maybe they just took it and they're not using it. That happens sometimes, right?
Yeah, or they
Yeah.
canceled the project, yeah, or got put on
But
hold or whatever. Yeah,
but I reached out at some point and said like, hey, just curious, like how'd that work out for you? Just to get that kind of feedback. And they said, "Oh no, it's great. We use it every day. There's like a line of users waiting to use it, and it's awesome." Like, oh well, that's like I said, I've never had that situation before where there's everything is just works and there's no bugs to speak of that is blocking them. But I attribute that to that, yeah, having that fast feedback cycle and
yeah.
being able to do that.
Do you notice? I notice that I think it affects the relationship with the customer too, because I think when they see you constantly delivering, it builds trust. Because I feel like the projects where they just throw it over the wall and you go disappear, the whole time they're like sitting back there wondering, like, okay, 3 weeks have went by. What's he doing? Has he actually worked on it? Is he busy doing other things? Like,
Yeah, and I mean, I hear it from both sides too. Like sometimes you go in with a customer and they say, well, the reason that you're here is because we had this other person doing it, and they said, okay, yeah, we understand, and they came back 3 months later, delivered something, and it wasn't really what the customer wanted or needed, right?
yeah.
And so
Well, that job with Lavinia, the guy was there, but in between us, when we both worked on it, whoever was in between us, yeah, apparently, Edgardo's like, yeah, the guy was here for 6 months and we don't know what the heck he did. So
yeah,
I just ended up starting with your code. I don't even know if, yeah, I assume
they just
a lot of
threw away
that's
the
been done.
whatever they had done, right?
Yeah,
So
I
yeah, I
don't
think it
know.
works better on all sides if you're that fast feedback thing. Sometimes
Yeah,
it's a challenge
yeah,
with the different companies, right?
yeah.
Some some customers are more open to doing that than others. You try to find the ones that are more open to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to me the other big benefit of it is you make sure you're building the right thing because I feel like I had this when I was at Westinghouse. You do this big requirements process. Well, everybody writes down their entire wish list, right? And then as a developers, you get this giant wish list, and there's like three or four things that the machine absolutely has to do, and then there's like 20 other things. And as a developer, like if you're not involved in the process of setting the requirements, you don't know which ones are important and which ones were there just because, well, we get one shot at writing this down, so we might as well include the kitchen sink and throw everything in there. And then you end
Yeah.
up working on stuff that's like not important and like chasing down bugs in areas of code that like, yeah, okay, yeah, we didn't really want that. So
Yeah, I mean, and another thing is, I'm sure tons of people have said it, but the customer doesn't always know what they want, right?
yeah,
They have an idea of something, but when they actually see it in action, maybe somebody comes up with a better idea. They
yeah.
realize, oh no, this is not actually going to work the way we want it to. And the sooner you can figure that out, the better. But yeah,
Yeah, I kind of have a
yeah,
good analogy for that actually. It just popped into my head. So like I used to be into rock climbing and my parents knew this and I would go take was it Mountain Tools or something would send out a catalog of all their climbing gear, and I would just start randomly circling stuff and like leave it on the counter around like Christmas time. And I would get stuff, but I would get like random stuff, and then I go back through the catalog. Oh yeah, I circled a whole bunch of random stuff instead of circling like the one thing that I wanted. I was like, oh, that'd be kind of cool. That'd be kind of cool. That'd be kind of cool. And my parents, like, same thing. Like they didn't know which ones were like important or which ones made sense, or like, they're just like, oh well, we circled all these things. We'll just randomly pick one. So
Yeah, I kind of like that analogy. It's kind of because by design for Christmas or something, you don't know what the other person is getting you. Right? So you
yeah,
just send it off and hope that
and
when
hope
it
they
comes
come back
back.
with the one that you really want. Yeah. Yeah, and like I was my own worst enemy because I wasn't very specific. I just circled one thing. The problem was like the stuff that I wanted was ridiculously expensive, so I circled a bunch of cheaper things to give them some options, and then of course
Yeah.
the cheap ones that were things that like. So I still have some weird climbing gear at home that I've like never really used that my parents got me for Christmas one year. I was like, oh.
Yeah,
So
I mean, the other thing that I've learned, I have two smallish children, 6 and almost 4 right now, but similar. Like when they ask for gifts, I found that the requirements change, right? What they want changes. So stuff they say 2 months ago, like I want this for my birthday. If I say all right, and then I get it, we get it for them then, and then on their birthday they're not interested in it anymore. So if you have that more of a fast feedback cycle, so we've learned to ask closer to the day,
yeah.
to like celebrations when they're going to get the gift, to make sure that something that they want is they're actually going to use it rather than have moved on to something else.
Do you find that idea carries over into writing code? Because I find that one of the big problems I see is a lot of people trying to predict the future and trying to include all this stuff to say, well, in the future we might need this. And I used to be one of those guys who's like trying to design all that stuff in up front and make everything super flexible. And I've kind of gotten to the point where I'm just like, I'll do exactly what you need right now. And if tomorrow you tell me you want this thing, great, then we'll figure out how to add it and we'll go back and refactor and change things. But I feel like there's this reluctance to refactor and change things, and this reluctance to like rework stuff. And so people are like, well, we got to get it right up front. Do you find that?
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to think that I've gotten better in my professional career at identifying places and things that when people say, "Oh, like it needs to be this way," sort of in the back of my mind, I'm thinking this is something that's probably has a high probability that it might change in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, then designing the hooks or whatever is needed to be able to change that, because, like I said, I think it's a good chance that it might change in the future.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that going back to the actor framework object oriented thing too, there's a lot of stuff to like about that as far as being able to leave yourself open to change
Yep.
more easily when you use those tools. So.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like part of it, if somebody from NI is listening, is the fact that NI makes it really hard to refactor stuff in LabVIEW, I think. Traditional LabVIEW, maybe not so much, but definitely object-oriented stuff in LabVIEW is really, really hard to refactor. Like the class hierarchy stuff, I feel like that's one of those few areas where like I very much take the time to try to get that right the first time. I generally don't succeed, but it's just so painful to change it later that like I feel like we could use some tools in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand all the under the hood stuff to the degree that some other people do, but I think that, I mean, it sounds like part of the issue is some of the benefits that you get from LabVIEW, like the kind of the edit time errors, you immediately know something is broken and stuff like that, that can play a part in making it harder to refactor some of this stuff. But it would be
Hmm.
nice if there were better tools out there to allow you to do that sort of thing.
Actually, I have a little hint that I learned from Stephen Mercer, and it's or Stephen Loftus Mercer. It's a great hint. Using that error window to debug when you're refactoring, like you change something, and then you go to that window, and it gives you the list of all the things you broke. You're like, okay, go through one at a time, just fix them. So
Yeah.
it's like a to-do list when you're refactoring. So it does help in that way. But it'd be
Hmm.
really nice if there was a way to do like, for example, I do a little bit of Python. I use PyCharm, and it has a bunch of refactoring tools in it that do these quote unquote safe refactorings that are like very unlikely to break your code. And it's really
Like what
nice to
kind of
be able,
refactorings does that include?
Like extracting interfaces, moving methods up and down, things like that. Some of those are not safe, but like some of them are safe. Or like, kind of like, like a fairly safe thing to do 90% of the time is to highlight a chunk of code and click edit, create sub VI.
Hmm.
99% of the time, that's not going to break your code. And in the weird cases where it will, it'll usually warn you. Like if it's got something with a control reference or something, it'll be like, hey, this could change the behavior of your VI.
Yeah. So when you're talking about refactoring in that case, it's more like things that you can do, moving it around so that it makes more sense in organization rather than refactoring in the sense that you're changing like the inputs and outputs and then how it functions under the hood, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, my definition of refactoring is like basically changing the underlying code without changing the input output or like the functionality that the user cares about. Because when you do that, you're going to change some things, right? If you make it way more efficient, then the timing changes. But hopefully, they're not relying on the timing. Maybe they are.
Yep.
There's some weird XKCD comics about that, but
Yeah.
not like Spacebar Heater or something.
That
But yeah,
recently came up in a internal conversation with the client.
oh yeah, yeah. It's what is it? Something like anything that's observable about your system, someone's relying on it. So if you make any changes to that, you're going to break something for somebody. Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah, which kind of speaks to trying to get the API correct, right? Like the high level API correct. If you're doing like reusable stuff or something that's going to be used by other, like going to integrate with other teams or
Hmm.
something, like getting the contracts right. That I think is worth doing in maybe a little bit more of a waterfall style fashion of like trying to get the requirements right and get that as close as you can, or build it something extensible. Like if you're sending stuff, send a variant or JSON or something so you can tack something extra on there if you need to.
Yeah.
Once the
Yeah.
version
Spending the
goes.
time to make sure that that's flexible enough to, or at least defined enough and you're relatively certain that it's going to cover your use cases. I mean, you can't always get it right even then, but yeah, those things I think are definitely worth doing that. Yeah, we try to spend more time on that too
Yeah, I mean
versus some of
that's
the
the
other
whole thing
things.
with like the future proofing stuff is like trying to figure out what's going to be easy to change in the future and what's going to be hard. And if there's something that you think might change that's going to be really hard to change in the future, maybe you can make a different decision that makes it like that opens up that avenue in the future or doesn't cut it off. But if it's
Hmm.
something where it's like going to be trivial to change in the future,
Yeah, who
then like
cares, right? Just do it.
in
Just
reality, yeah, just do it then when you need it.
yeah, yeah. There's a cost associated with how difficult it's going to be for sure. That's another thing that I learned early on in my career. I was tasked with specking out a PC, I think, for a client, and I, coming from kind of a student's perspective back then, I used to spend tons of time specking out my own PCs or building my own PC and choosing all the components and everything. Like, oh, do I really want to spend X amount more for this updated video card or this extra RAM, etc. And when I was doing it for work, I was like, oh, do you think I should do this? And they're like, this is how much we charge. Like, if you're spending this amount of time on it and the cost difference is less than that, who cares? Right?
Yeah.
Just pick the thing that's going to get you there faster.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of figuring out what's important and what's not. And actually, computers are a great example because, like, I know what I'm doing, and it's still daunting when I go buy a new computer. Like, I don't really know, like, do I need this speed of RAM or that speed of RAM or this much RAM or that much RAM? Like, a lot of it's like a guessing game.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, you need to get like, I don't know, 80% of the way there and then then at that point it's kind of a
yeah.
coin toss, right?
But then also some things, like, right, like, especially in the context of work where you're getting paid for it and, like, your time is valuable, get a stick of RAM of whatever size and know that you can change it out later if you need more, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how expensive is it to buy another stick of RAM later if you decide that 16 is not enough and you need eight, you need whatever the next size is, 32 or whatever.
Yeah. I can multiply by two. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, very cool. So you're also part of this AF Guild. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So the AF Guild is the Actor Framework Guild. Uh, and the idea behind that came from, um, I think it was the GLA Summit or after the GLA Summit a couple of years ago. I I was watching it and I said, man, there are a decent number of presentations about new tooling built around DQMH. And that's cool. But why doesn't that exist for Active Framework? I mean, we talked about some of the difficulties with onboarding newer developers or people that aren't as familiar with it. Like, it sure would be helpful if there were some tooling built around Active Framework, and there's no reason there can't be to help with the development process. And that's kind of where the idea for the Active Framework Guild was born. Yeah, the idea that people can come and discuss and present ideas or develop tools that are useful. I think there's some cool things that come out of it so far. It sees periods of more or less activity, but yeah.
So
if people are interested, they can find it at the Active Framework forum. I talk about it there. It's a text signature.
Yeah, I'm sure Taylor can get us a link in the show notes. So I know Zyah has some tools. So did you start building tools at Zyah first, or did you start the AF Guild first, or what was the order there?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think back. I think we started building stuff for ourselves first, and then because stuff that just like anybody else has written a million times, and it's like, okay, now we have this group of people. I can actually spend more time kind of refining some of these things and making it nicer. If we're doing this for ourselves, this is something that we think that's probably useful for other people as well. Why not put it out there and do something with that, and hopefully build some common utilities and tools that everyone can use to make their lives easier.
Yeah, I think that's a problem in the LabVIEW community because there's certain things that like all of us have written tools to do. And it's like, why are we all wasting our time rewriting these things? And there's some tools that I've even written multiple times because they're like just little scripting tools, like for example, to like go through a project and remove all the class mutation history. Like
on purpose, or because you forgot or can't find it again?
I've written again mostly or mostly because I can't find it again. Like I know I did it in some other project, but I can't remember what project. I can't find it, and it's like I could spend 10 minutes looking for it, or I could write this thing in 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. But you do that 10 times, now you've wasted a lot of time, and
that's so.
But like more complicated tools too. I'm sure. Like, how many different tools are there for, I don't know, various databases or other things that people just keep reinventing the wheel?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm also a part of the GID Exchange Committee, and that's kind of what you're talking about is one of the driving, forces behind that, in the sense that there's stuff that's out there, but it's not necessarily the easiest to discover, and we want to encourage people to do more of that. And so that's kind of the purpose of the GID Exchange, is to promote those ideas, get those ideas shared and flowing, kind of like, because I mean, you were saying before, I think everybody wants it to be easier for everybody to develop. And it's easier if you're using the same tools in a lot of cases, rather than everybody doing their own one-off thing that does things slightly differently. It's harder to maintain. There are incompatibilities that you would like to avoid, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things the GID Exchange was trying to do was to raise funds to do some development. Have they gotten any fruition on that, or what's the deal with that, I guess?
We've kind of moved away from the funding of things and more towards the promotion. I think I'm allowed to say this. Q or Jesper can yell at me if I'm not later, but but I mean, it just to be honest, there wasn't a lot of money coming in from trying to do that, again, because the LabVIEW community is very small compared to some of these other communities like Python and stuff that's out there. And also, in order to fund some of the ideas, it'd probably take more of a company's investment for some of these things than just individuals and trying to do that. So we found that wasn't necessarily the best use of our time, and so we've tried to promote the ideas more and get people interested in that way. And so now there's a forum, there's an NI forum dedicated to the GID Exchange, where it's kind of like the LabVIEW Idea Exchange, where you can go and you can post new ideas there, and people can kudos them and kind of get support in that way. So that's another thing to kind of check out.
So what is the end game if you submit an idea there? Then is it just to let people know that it's going on? Like, what are people then eventually going to come help me develop my great idea? Is that kind of the thought, or?
So I mean, you could be posting idea just because you want people to be aware of it, but I think another big part of it is getting traction. So maybe it's something that like I don't know as much about like CI/CD as let's say you do, right?
Yeah.
But I have an idea for something that would be pretty cool, so I can post it there, and it brings eyes to the idea, and maybe it attracts someone who does know more about that either already has a tool that I'm not aware of, or it's like, oh, that would be a cool tool to develop, and they could do that and share it with the rest of the community.
Yeah, cool. No, well, Alan and I had that, what is it, the UI actor thing, and that was kind of what happened. I gave a presentation on some scripting stuff, and Alan came up and said, "Hey, I have this great idea. I don't, you've done some scripting stuff in this area. Like, can you help me?" And we worked together and got it done. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So just like expanding that pool, right? Because that happened because you were in the same room together. And
Yeah, I feel like the messaging on the GID exchange on their new NI forum thing needs to emphasize that more. I don't feel like that's gotten out as well as it probably should.
yeah, that's still being refined. That's
Yeah.
good feedback.
Yeah, well, it's
So,
fairly new, so that's
mhm.
good.
I mean, yeah, we're still evolving. It's not we're trying to also do like the fast feedback thing, incorporate things
Yeah.
as requirements and stuff changes. So
No, I had a business coach and he used to say, uh, something's a good idea when you can apply it in multiple different areas. So, like,
mhm.
getting fast feedback works in a whole lot of different areas when it comes to software development. So that tells you that it's probably a good idea. So at
Yeah.
least a good sign, good
Yep.
correlation. So, speaking of tools, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the tools that you've made uh, at Zyah? And I will say there is one that I use very, very often, and that is the right clicking on a actor framework send message to go directly to the block diagram of the.
Yeah, that's the one I use most often too, just because I mean, if you're using Active Framework, it's likely you have a lot of messages.
Yep.
I've seen some stuff where that's not necessarily the case. That's probably another topic. But yeah, so that the one that you're talking about is I think it's called Open AF Payload Method. Payload method referring to what's actually when the message gets received by an actor, the code that it actually executes. And the way to get to that without this tool is pretty cumbersome. You have to navigate the project and go into the message class and find it. This adds a right-click menu to it says like open a payload method. So if you right-click on the send of a message, it will take you directly to the block diagram for that payload method. And I don't know if you knew this, but there's also a quick drop shortcut for that, which is how actually I interact with it.
Oh, see, I
Um,
did not know that.
yeah.
You type the
So
name of
so
the
I don't.
message and it takes you right to it or something?
You highlight the message. So same thing. You highlight the message and just control space, and the default is control E, and it'll just
Oh,
take you right to the block
oh,
diagram.
cool. Yeah.
And I actually recently released an update for that, which it'll work as well on uh, message class constants on the block diagram, right? So not
Okay.
the send thing,
Cool.
because sometimes you feed that into like a time delayed send message or something like that,
Yeah.
not necessarily the send. So that's one. Another,
Actually, this discussion reminds me, one of the first times I think I even met you, well, we've probably met before that, but was working on the actor framework tester thing, which is kind of
yeah.
related to this whole discussion, right? Because that's an actor framework tool. And
Mhm.
yeah, trying to collaborate to get that to work with interfaces or something, right? And I don't think
Yeah,
we ever
yeah.
did. I think that's
Interface. It
still,
was actually I think it was PPLs.
was it PPLs? Okay, yeah. And then interfaces came along afterwards, and I never updated for that either. So.
Yeah. I'd like to get back to that at some point.
Speaking of tools that need some love, if some actor framework developer really wants to work on that, I am happy to turn that over because I just don't do enough actor framework anymore to make it worth my while to go fix it.
Yeah, like I said, I'd like to come back to it. I don't really have the bandwidth to at the moment, but hopefully, or if
Yeah.
anybody else wants to, sounds interesting, hit us up.
Yeah. But yeah, what other tools you got? I know I
I
can
think,
think of at least two more.
yeah, there's the two ones that we use probably the most often are we have a forwarding utility, a message forwarding thing, which is basically, again, one of the pain points in Active Framework can be if you're adhering to the message tree the way is recommended. If you want to get a message from one part of the tree to another, you have to kind of go up the tree and create a new message at each step of the way, or at least before interfaces, you have to create a new message for each actor to interpret and kind of just copy the same information along the way. And interfaces at least helps where you can reuse the same message over and over, but you still have to create an override at each step along the way to send it where you want to. So the forwarding utility helps. That's another thing that we've updated fairly recently, I guess. So you can register as a source of a message and register as a sink of a message. And if you're using that, it'll just automatically, still using the tree, because there's benefits to doing that, get to where it needs to go, and you don't have to create overrides or new messages at each step of the way. That's a tool I would say has the potential to be abused. Like people could use it to send messages everywhere.
Yeah,
please don't do that.
Global message router thing.
Yeah, that's not its intent. It's the use cases that we had in mind were one, deeply nested UIs, right, where you have an actor with a front panel that has a sub panel in it that has like a GUI component in there, which might itself have a sub panel that has more, and each of those are nested actors of the other, right?
Yep.
And if you want to click on something or do something in there and send that message to the rest of your system, it has to go up the Active Framework message tree.
Yep.
So that's one place where this helps a lot.
So this reminds me of our previous discussion about people reinventing the wheel, because I have seen 4 or 5 different people who all have frameworks that are basically what you described. That is, this thing has a front panel with 2 sub panels, and they're either horizontal or vertical, and you pick one, and then you can keep nesting them, and you can create these crazy UIs.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that at least I've seen 4 or 5. Weeby's got one. Matthias has one. You have one. Ravi has one. And it's like, really, do we need to be putting our energy and effort into those, or could we put that into like solving our customer's problem? So
yeah.
The
other use case for the forwarding utility that really stands out in my mind is plugin architectures, where you have you built the core application first, right? And you can add in plugins later, and you don't necessarily know which messages they're going to send, these new plugins. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't, this allows you to dynamically register for different messages. So you can send it to, like, you have, like, say a new instrument plugin and a new GUI for that. You can have those both as plugins. They can live in different parts of the actor tree, and one registers as a source, one registers as a sink for messages, and it'll automatically get it. So you can add in these plugins without modifying the core application.
Does it register like by name, or is it like you pass an object of the message or something? So that, like, is it like
the way that we have it done is it registers it by it's by value, but it's the interface itself.
Now here's a question, because at one point I went to some CLA Summit and they had this thing with this like global publish subscribe thing, and I tried to do that with objects, and I ran into the question of, okay, if I have this message that goes from A to B, and I create a child class of that message, now does everybody who registers for that get, right? Like, how does that work? Do you get the most specific one that you register for, or do you get all of them? And like,
yeah, this, in our instance, it's the specific. Again, it's not by a specific message. It's by the specific interface that it's a part of.
Okay.
So you register an interface, actually, not the
anything
specific
that conforms to that interface. So if I create a child of that interface for a separate,
anything that is a direct, I think. I have to check this again.
Yeah, because so that got really weird and messy of like what you would get and not get, and like, yeah,
because I think the way that it works, it checks, is it a type of this interface that you've registered?
Okay.
Or not considering inheritance.
Now the next question I would have though is, say I've got, say, 4 multimeters that are all the same, and they've each got a multimeter thing over here in the hardware side of my tree, right? And they've got a GUI thing over here in the GUI side. Mm-hmm. And all of them broadcast, hey, I've got new data. How do I link those to? Do you just have to do some kind of filtering? So you do some kind of ID filtering? Can I
I
say
think
I want these messages, but only when they originate from this actor?
you're saying there are like different instances of the same
Yes,
actor,
exactly.
but
The
the
same exact actor. Yeah. So I've got 4 instances of a GUI actor over here that talk to 4 instances, right? And they're linked. Like one's linked to one, two's linked to two, three, right? Do you
yeah,
supposed to do that on your end? I guess you get
yeah, the
all of them
forwarding
and you
utility
just
doesn't
say.
filter out that way because I mean
So you would
if they're
just
all
get
using the same
all the
interface.
messages and you would just say, this is for me, this one's not.
You need to add some sort of like identifier in
Okay.
as part of the data.
Okay.
Do that. But one of the nice things of using active framework messages as opposed to something else as a more like loosely coupled solution
Yeah.
is that you still get to keep all the strict type properties of the message.
Hmm.
So it's easier to do that sort of thing, I think, than like putting everything into a cluster that's turned into a variant and then pulling that out and trying to filter on that.
Yeah.
You have like you can make a specific input that's like this is my ID, and then on the other end you have that
Yeah.
you can work with.
Yeah, DQMH they do the what is it, string invariant. And so there's always
Mm-hmm.
the possibility for typos and there's always the possibility for the variant not to be what you think it is. Uh
That was
and
another
yeah.
appealing thing that I found that was appealing about Active Framework to me is
In DQMH that's not a huge problem because usually the scripting tools take care of that. And DQMH also like tries very hard to force you to test stuff because it pops up the tester all the time and it's constantly bugging you. And so if you actually test it when the tester tells you to, then
mm-hmm.
generally it's kind of hard to screw that up, but it does happen sometimes. Sometimes you change something. So,
Yeah,
and
that
then you
was
also,
yeah. I was going to say that was the forwarding utility, and the other big thing I think is Bowser the browser,
yeah.
which we mentioned before. But that's a way to kind of help developers. Uh, that's not a tool to use to create code. It's more to view code as it exists and to help get a better picture of how it's organized and everything. So the idea behind that is that when you launch Bowser, it will scan the project that you have for actors. This is for actor framework stuff, and it will show you all the methods in an actor that have messages associated with them. So because that's one of the things that could be confusing, right? You open an actor, you're like, I don't know which is which methods are kind of the public message API versus other things, right? If you haven't created virtual folders or something, kind of delineate that.
Yeah, yeah,
And
you definitely
also
have to do that.
and also since actors are objects, they can inherit from other actors which support messages that so you don't directly see, hey, this actor can also do this other thing because it's a part of its ancestor hierarchy. So Bowser allows you to see all of that. And yeah, we have
That was
some.
my biggest pet peeve with actor framework. Like I open up an actor and like it have like one message. Okay, great. And then I see that they're sending it 5 other messages. I'm like, well, where did those come from? Because it inherits, but like there's no easy way to even tell that from the LabVIEW project.
Yeah. So you can kind of see the inheritance structure from Bowser. You can see which messages it supports. You can jump to the block diagrams. It'll show you the block diagrams. It's very much structured with a kind of a navigation and content panel. So when you're clicking on the messages and you can see the different implementations of them, if there are overrides, you can choose between them and see what's going on there. So it's especially helpful if you're kind of in situations that we've encountered where you're taking over someone else's code, right? And you're not sure what's going on. That can help you. Once you're familiar with it, it's probably you don't need to use it as much, but it is helpful there. And we have ambitions to expand the functionality there and do other things with it. Like there's no reason that couldn't be a browser for just classes in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
Factors it might be more apparent, but you can have the same issues with any class, right?
Yep.
You know that these are the methods, but it can also do other stuff because it inherited functionality. What can it do? How do you find that stuff?
Yeah.
Bowser could potentially help with that.
Yeah, your comment about like it becomes less useful once you kind of know your way around the project. I found with Enrique's tool, Enrique has a similar
Panther,
tool
Panther
for
dashboard.
DQMH. Yeah, I find it really useful when I don't know the project. Once I know the project, I still find some uses for it, but I find myself not opening it all that often unless I like specifically need to search for something. I'm like, okay, I could do this the hard way, or I could go open this. do it the
Yeah, it's
easy
kind
way.
of, I guess it's sort of a utility to help get that mental model in your head,
Yep.
right? And once it's in your head, you might not need to reference it as much, but it's still there in case you need it. It can help with some other things too.
The other tool though that's missing from the active framework world is anti-doc, because
Hmm.
that is pretty amazing. The fact that like it generates those message diagrams for you. If you could do that for active framework, that would be quite good.
Yeah,
Also,
I mean,
plug. It's open source, so it is possible to go add that if anybody out there feels ambitious.
yeah, that would be pretty nice.
Cool. So, the last thing I want to talk about a little bit is mobbing and pair programming, because I'm very bullish on it, although I tend to work alone, so I don't do it all that often. But whenever I get the chance, I do. And maybe it's just that I like people, and so I get tired of working by myself, so I go out of my way to try to do pair programming and mob programming, but I quite like it. So, what has your experience been with that?
It actually ties in to a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. When I was, um, like I said, there was a pretty strong team that help helped me out a lot when I was first learning LabVIEW. And when I went on and did my own thing as a consultant, um, one of the things I missed was working on a team and doing that sort of thing. And so I've kind of found that again, in part with the formation of Zyah Solutions. And in doing that, it's a lot easier to share ideas. And one of the ways that we do that is when we can. It's not always possible, but we like to mob or at least pair on a lot of the stuff that we're doing. So also going back to something we said before, a lot of the times we used it. I find it most effective, not necessarily in the rote implementation stuff where you're like you have, say you're writing a driver and it's clearly defined what it needs to do. Like mobbing or pairing, I don't really see as much of an advantage for doing that. Then maybe you catch some bugs,
Mhm.
um, and you can review some stuff faster. But what the real benefit I see is during the design, kind of the stuff that we're talking about, the stuff that's hard to change later, that you
Mhm.
do want to put more thought into, and like how it interacts, how it's going to affect the rest of your application or system. Being able to have two or more people there, kind of, and again, it part of it is because we're all fairly senior level, I'd say,
Mhm.
so we can have really really fun discussions actually about like what if we did it this way, or what is this going to solve the problem, and somebody will come up and say like, oh, but we need to consider this, and so we can put that come to a consensus on a design much faster. I think that will allow us to do those things, like keep it flexible in areas that we know are a highly subject to change, and b would otherwise be hard to change if we didn't plan for it. So
Yeah, I had a discussion with Steve and the guys at the virtual coffee the other day, and we kind of had a similar discussion. I think there are two phases. There's the kind of design phase where you're trying to decide what to do and design things, and then there's the execution phase. And I feel like the benefits are different at the different phases. So, right, the design phase, it's having people to bounce ideas off of. It's making sure you get that design thing as good as you can. And then in the execution stage, it might depend on like what level the people are at, right?
mhm.
But if you're, it's nice to watch people and see like, if I worked with like Stefan, I'd probably learn every keyboard shortcut, right? Because he's like super master at that. Right.
Yeah.
So like that type of learning happens, and also like catching bugs and like I do stupid things like I don't know how many times I've dropped a case structure and meant to put something in the true case and it ends up in the false case or whatnot,
Oh
and
yeah.
that's just so annoying. But like if you had a partner there, they could catch you, or if you like forget to close a reference somewhere,
Mhm.
right? You might leave a memory leak and they might catch that. So I think there's some benefits to that. And
Yeah,
also
I
there's
mean,
some yeah.
the other big area I think is training,
Is
right?
what?
So
Cross training, yeah.
yeah, well, cross training or just like if you have a new resource, this comes up less when what we've done, but if yeah, having somebody who again is not as experienced, like pairing them with someone who is more experienced, so that they can learn faster, or like you're saying, cross training in an area where you're just not as familiar,
Yeah.
being paired or mobbing with those people, that's super helpful, right? Because otherwise, what's the alternative? you write down, you look through it, you spend time confused, you write down questions, and then maybe you get in touch with the person who knows the answers to it. Maybe they have a meeting or something and you can't get in touch with them for a few hours or a day. And then that's time lost, right? Whereas if you're both right there learning, it goes much faster.
Yeah, the learning one is another thing that I think you could benefit from Paramount programming for, like learning new techniques. Like, if you're deciding that you're going to start writing unit tests or doing TDD or continuous integration or something,
Yeah.
just like getting those steps down and like, if you're pairing with somebody and you start writing code and they're like, hey, shouldn't we write a test first? Oh,
Hmm.
right. Like or things like that. Or, hey, it's been a while since we've checked into Get. Maybe we should check into Get so we can go run the CI stuff and make sure we haven't broken anything. So I feel like
Yeah.
there's still so yeah. I feel like there's benefits in both parts of the development cycle, the design and the execution phase. I think it just kind of depends on what stage you're at and what level you're at, whether the benefits at either stage make sense.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, cool. Well, it's been a great discussion. I quite enjoyed it. Any last minute parting thoughts?
No, check out the Active Framework Guild. Check out the GID Exchange. Help us share some of these ideas.
Yeah, actually, I did forget my one question, which is, can you tell me? And I'm putting you on the spot because I did not prep you for this, but can you tell me about a time that you tried something and it didn't work out the way you thought it would?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's something that I tried. Didn't work out the way I expected. I know there was one thing that comes to mind is that I had taken over a project um, for someone else, and they had not done things necessarily the way that I would have done them myself. And so I had this idea like, hey, I'm just gonna refactor this completely, right? And do this the way that it should be done. And sounded great, but I quickly realized there was a lot of stuff in there that was not super obvious and things were done away. And it was like, even if it was done poorly, like needed to be done the way that it was being done in order to accomplish what they were accomplishing and in order to figure out uh, what what would need to be done in the way that I was refactoring it was going to take a lot more effort than if I had just stuck with what they had done and like done stuff maybe piecemeal or yeah, not just wholesale though, like just throw everything out and start from scratch because that turned out to be a mistake. And I was like, this was something I was doing fixed price actually, which is not uh, always not usually the way I work, but in this case, it was especially problematic for me because I was thinking, oh shoot, I got to get this working, and now I've kind of dug myself a deeper hole by trying to refactor this than just trying to work with what's there and do things like refactor as I go, doing stuff in place, having the tests in place to make sure that as I refactor thing, it's going to do what I expect it to do, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's an example I can think of.
No, I mean, I think we've all been there. I've definitely done that before. I've done the full rewrite a few times and it has worked, but I think I just got lucky. And looking back on it, it was probably not the best decision. So, yeah, I'm definitely on the team refactor anymore. I'm like, if you're lucky enough that it's in modules, take a module and take a module apart and replace it with an actor or a DQMH module or something. But
Mhm.
and then just replace them one at a time or something. But yeah, doing the wholesale rewrite is generally not the way to go.
Yeah, and
They
I mean,
introduce
and
a
while you're
lot of
doing it, until it's done, it like goes against the
things
whole fast
broken.
feedback thing we're talking about, right?
Yes,
And
exactly.
you
That's
kind
the
of
main
stuck.
reason I don't like it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and
What
that's
I
kind of where I ended up, right? I got to the end, I'm like, oh, this doesn't behave the way I thought it should, or was they thought it should. So
Yeah, well, that brings up another point too. That sometimes the correct behavior is not what we think the correct behavior is, but it is whatever it was doing all along. Even if it may
mhm.
have been wrong, people are relying on it, and so doing something like approval testing or figuring out a way to capture that existing behavior so that you know that it's still behaving the same is a very interesting, uh, very useful tool. I
Yeah,
just so I'm doing this SE radio thing, and I'm gonna interview a guy on approval testing, and I was looking at it, and I discovered this idea called combinations, which I thought was really powerful. you basically pass it a couple of arrays of like, these are the input parameters. Like,
Hmm.
if you got, say you got an add function, right? Add's really
Okay.
simple, but like you pass it like 1, 2, 3, 4 as an array, and you pass it like 1, 2, 3, whatever numbers, and then it will pick all the possible combinations between them, and run the code and just capture all the output and just take a
Mm.
snapshot of it. And then you can change
Oh,
whatever
okay.
you want, and it'll rerun all those combinations. So you can get like several hundred tests really easily just by dropping a couple of arrays on a block diagram.
It does all the permutations and stuff for you and saves that. That's
Yeah, I
kind
was
of
thinking
nice.
in LabVIEW there has to be a way to do that, right? To put like an array and then somehow like go through VI server and figure out what's on the connector pane and somehow map them. And so you just pass like a VI reference in this thing and be like, run this X number, for all the permutations. I think that would be really
Sounds like
useful.
a good idea to post on the GIG exchange forum.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to build that. I think that's one of my next things to build because that is the challenge, right? Designing new code, I feel like, is less of a challenge than refactoring existing codes because there's all these
Totally.
constraints that you don't know about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that aren't documented, and like these expectations that are there. When it's new, like there are no expectations. I mean, they kind of have an idea of what they want, but they're generally the customer at least realizes that whatever's in their head is not exactly how it's going to look. But when you're
Hmm.
refactoring a legacy code, they want it to look exactly and behave exactly like it did before, except with these changes. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of the simplicity. Yeah. Very cool. All right. Well, you and I will talk some more later, I'm sure. But
The mastermind for sure, right?
yeah. Yeah, actually, we should put a quick plug in for that. Casey is one of our mastermind participants. You've been there for maybe not since the beginning, but close to the beginning. I don't remember if you were one of the first
I
tier
think
or the second.
probably coming up on close to 2 years, or if not already 2 years,
Yeah, you
right?
might be the second tier. I think we've been doing it for 3 or 4 years now. So, yeah, if anybody's interested in that, you can go to my website, SAS Workshops, click on the mastermind button,
Yeah, actually,
information there. But
that was how I was getting my fix in part before Zyah Solutions started, right? Trying to bounce ideas off each other. So a lot of the stuff that we've talked about has sort of had some of its origins there.
yeah, we've definitely, I mean, you and Enrique, who's also in the group, have bounced ideas off with the browser, and his. So,
Hmm.
one last question, actually, because I meant to ask this earlier and it slipped my mind. How much did you guys influence each other as far as like idea sharing back and forth between those two
Yep.
projects?
I mean, I definitely took some ideas from him, and he took an idea or two from mine. Enrique had that presentation at GDevCon NA this year, where he
Mhm.
talked about some of that. And yeah, there was something about dragging the messages and putting code, kind of like how quick drop does, putting on your cursor and dropping on the block diagram, and that he took from Bowser. And I saw something that he was doing. Like we were both giving presentations the year that we introduced these tools at GDevCon NA, and he had a search function that displayed and like went through and showed the results a lot nicer than I was doing. And so I said like, hey, show me how you do that. And he said, oh, I was wondering how you did this. And we showed each other how to do those different things. And we brought them into our own code bases. So that was pretty cool to be able to just immediately see benefits from collaborating right there.
Yeah, cool. All right, I promise we're done now. Cut.
That was fun.
That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabviewexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the LV Experiment.